I got a request last month to do a video about affirmative action. I know how it helped the lives of real people in one important industry, the space program. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. In 1961, President Kennedy signed an executive order on race discrimination. It said that anyone getting a contract from the federal government had to take affirmative action to ensure that they weren't discriminating based on race, creed, color, or national origin. This wasn't the first time that this phrase was used. In 1935, a law was passed to make it legal to form a union. Yes, there was a time when it was legal to stop workers from forming a union. The law said companies who had blocked unions had to take affirmative action to make sure the law was carried out. That original affirmative action didn't have anything to do with race, but the law did help black women tobacco workers in Virginia. They formed a union and walked out to protest wages and working conditions. Kennedy's order was a real game changer for the federal government. Before it, what would happen is if you had a complaint, you'd take it to the government and they'd try and fix it. Now, instead, if a company got money from the federal government, first they had to say that anyone could come and work for them. And then second, they had to create an environment where that was actually true. My area of expertise as a historian is aerospace. If there was ever an industry that needed affirmative action in the 1960s, it was aerospace. Fortune magazine had an article in 1943 where they said, "You will find almost universal prejudice against Negroes at aircraft plants." You can find quotes said out loud on the record from industry leaders that are beyond shocking today. North American Aviation helped build the Apollo spacecraft. This was their president, Dutch Kindleberger. When North American opened a new plant in Kansas City in 1941, he said flat out that they wouldn't hire black people regardless of their training. Hiring black people was against company policy, he said, and black people would only be hired as janitors. The head of industrial relations at Vultee Aircraft said, "It is not the policy of this company to employ people other than of the Caucasian race." With Kennedy's order, that was over. Kennedy had just supercharged the space program. These companies were all looking for contracts. Because of affirmative action, company policy was going to have to change. And here's how that played out in real people's lives. Frank Crosley got out of the Navy and got a degree in metallurgical engineering. He was the first African American to ever do that. But he knew about all the discrimination in the industry.
Well, I decided I would study engineering, and if I couldn't get a job as an engineer, I would either go to Canada or Mexico. Canada had the virtue of speaking English, and Mexico had the virtue of having colored people.
Frank got his degree from the Illinois Institute of Technology, which had a department for metals research. Frank got interviewed for 2 leadership jobs there.
I got offers from both supervisors who interviewed me. And then I learned that at the executive level, someone had turned down my employment.
Frank told this to the president of the college, John Retaliata, and while Frank was sitting there, Retaliata called to find out what was going on. Frank heard the person on the other end of the phone say it was because Frank was black.
And he said, "You can't do that because we are an equal opportunity employer." And that was the first time I'd heard the expression equal opportunity employer.
Frank was made head of the IIT Metals Research Department. So that's one example of what affirmative action could do. Here's another. During the space program, the population of eastern Florida exploded. To find a place for all those people to live, the housing authority near Kennedy Space Center took over some neighborhoods that had been all black. They turned them into public housing, with a catch. Theodis Ray grew up there.
They built these subdivisions naturally, sure, it was all white only.
The housing authority told black people to resettle in another part of the county, far, far away from the space center.
Yeah, I lived 20 miles away from NASA. but you had to drive every day.
A lot of the black families who'd been kicked out earned too much money to qualify for public housing. So they had two choices: take lower-paying jobs to qualify for public housing or live in their cars. The head of the NAACP wrote to the president about it. He also wrote to NASA. The agency had been whining that they couldn't comply with affirmative action because no black people would move to Florida. The NAACP pointed out that maybe this was why. The complaint finally made it to the head of the Federal Equal Employment Council, who said that he would give the problems at Cape Canaveral continuing study with the view of initiating appropriate affirmative action. Something similar happened near the NASA Flight Research Center in California. In that case, the head of NASA wrote a letter where he praised an excellent example of affirmative action when they helped a black man get a house in an all-white neighborhood. A fourth example is when NASA was forced to open up its college co-op program to black colleges for the first time. That led to NASA hiring its first black engineers. Now, as you can imagine, there were a lot of people who really hated these laws, and they tried and they continue to try a number of schemes to turn them around. The first one, Martin Luther King called out in his I Have a Dream speech. It is not a part that they usually show you in school.
Down in Alabama with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification.
So what does interposition and nullification mean? It's a theory that a state can interpose its own laws over federal laws, and that doing that nullifies the federal law. It's what George Wallace did when he tried to block the integration of the University of Alabama.
As Governor and Chief Magistrate of the state of Alabama, I deem it to be my solemn obligation and duty to stand before you, representing the rights and sovereignty of this state and its peoples.
And it's what Governor Greg Abbott did when he tried to say that Texas had the right to handle immigration any way it wanted. Texas could interpose its laws, and that would nullify the federal laws.
With its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification.
When the courts blocked that, there was another scheme.
Here I am, and I need special help to get into that university because I'm black.
This is Dr. Alan Backey.
Now, what type of self-esteem is a person going to build for himself when he starts to develop the attitude that everywhere he goes, because he or she is black, he is going to have special help from the government to make it?
Backey sued the medical school at the University of California, Davis. In 1978, his case went all the way to the Supreme Court. To comply with affirmative action, the medical school had a quota. 16 out of every 100 students who got in had to be black. Backey said that was reverse discrimination. The court decided that affirmative action laws were okay, but quotas weren't. And people's opinions broke down about how you'd expect.
The question arises that if it took you 200 years to build a house and somebody came along with a match to burn that house down, how would you feel about the person?
Robert Friedland, another med student, said he felt pretty good.
Well, I'm pleased because it struck down a program which I feel has very questionable criteria involved, that it was explicitly preventing white students from applying through the program.
Along with the idea of reverse discrimination, there was yet another scheme.
Failure to enforce these structural limits has brought us a nearly unlimited administrative state.
This is Leonard Leo. He believes that there should be absolutely minimal government, powers stated in the Constitution, and pretty much nothing else.
It has never been, and never will be, too much to ask that judges in our country exercise their power virtuously. The good news is that Anil Gorsuch and a number of lower court judicial appointments from the past year, we already have found a number of them. And the great news is that many more are on the way.
Along with Mitch McConnell, Leonard Leo is almost singularly responsible for the conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court and the flood of conservative judges who came into power under Donald Trump. These new judges do not care for affirmative action. Best example, the Voting Rights Act.
Court's conservative majority appeared poised to strike down at least part of the act and eliminate the current federal oversight of voting in the South.
They did strike it down, and when they did, Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion. In it, he said that our country has changed. Restrictions on southern states didn't speak to the current condition. The attitude he expressed seems to be, yeah, things were bad then, and when they were bad, it was okay for the federal government to do extraordinary things. But now things aren't bad, so it's time to go back to how it was before. Black people were given their advantage, so now they were on par with every other immigrant group. There was another feeling which went along with all of this, which was that segregation happened a long time ago. Well, the thing is, Americans don't really know what a long time ago means. The comedian Eddie Izzard used to have a bit about this in his stand-up act.
I saw, something in a program on something in Miami, and they were saying, we've redecorated this building to how it looked over 50 years ago. People are going, no, surely not, no. No one was alive then.
The Civil Rights Act passed 60 years ago, and it's honestly why so many Americans think it's okay to get rid of affirmative action programs. But the situation for Black Americans is not the same for every other immigrant group. Black people were brought here to be slaves. For 300 years, they got no money for their labor. Also, it was illegal in most states to teach Black people how to read and write. In Georgia, the fine was $16,000. In South Carolina, it was $32,000. In Louisiana, if it happened twice, the penalty was death. Death for teaching a Black person to read or write. When the first Black colleges opened, only around 10% of Black people in America could read or write. So no education, no money, so no way to buy property. That's 300 years. Then 100 years of Jim Crow. Inferior schools, inferior social position, no access to credit, weren't allowed to live in most neighborhoods. All of that changed by law 60 years ago. Is that enough time to make up for 400 years of being held back? Leonard Leo's judges think so, and they're doing everything they can to dismantle affirmative action. Judge Roberts said, our country has changed. Has it? How long does it take to make things all better? They're asking that question all over the country right now. About Black people at the Supreme Court, about women in Iowa.
This goes back to a law that was passed in Iowa back in 1987. It made Iowa the very first state to require that an equal number of men and women serve on state boards and commissions. This bill...
Just like with Justice Roberts, the feeling was life was now different.
Senate Republicans said that that requirement isn't necessary anymore and that the bill will...
They won, and the law was repealed. Does equality work without the government intervening? Leonard Leo would say, yeah, sure, no problem. So do most of his judges. But ask yourself, do polluters stop polluting voluntarily? Do robbers stop robbing because you ask them to? Would meat packers keep bugs out of your food or stop hiring 13-year-olds just on their own? For a long time, there's been an agreement that society works best when there are rules in place. Maybe it makes sense to just keep it that way. And if you want to learn more about how affirmative action touched the lives of real people, I want to suggest the book that's displayed behind me, We Could Not Fail, which I wrote with Stephen Moss. I put a link to buy it in the metadata. It's on Amazon, and it was published by the University of Texas Press.